Today, we are diving into a story about rebellion, politics, and raw national power. It's a story where two different groups of athletes make the exact same choice, but their fates couldn't be more different. This whole thing just pulls back the curtain on how justice in the world of sports, well, it isn't always just about right and wrong. It's about power and status. Let's get into it.
So here's the mystery at the heart of it all. You've got two teams, and they both defy a major global moral line. For one team, it becomes a tiny footnote in careers full of celebration. For the other, it's a professional death sentence. How is that even possible? Stick with me, because the answer reveals something fascinating and honestly pretty unsettling about the intersection of sports and national pride.
Okay, here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll set the scene and establish the moral line that was crossed. Then, we'll meet the two teams who decided to step right over it. After that, we'll compare their punishments, look at the completely devastating impact on their careers, and then, finally, we'll ask that big question: why the massive, massive difference? To really get what happened, you have to understand the times. We're heading back to the 1980s, a decade where the world was drawing a very clear line in the sand over one particular issue. And you know, this wasn't just some friendly suggestion. It was a powerful global statement. Apartheid was this brutal state-enforced system of racial segregation. So in response, nations all over the world agreed to isolate South Africa, both culturally and athletically. They were literally using sport as a tool for political pressure. So to go and compete there meant you weren't just defying your home country, you were defying a global moral consensus. And yet, some people did cross that line. Today, we're zeroing in on two specific groups from opposite ends of the sporting food chain who decided that for them, the reward was worth the risk.
On one side, you have the RSO Rebels, 14 cricketers from Sri Lanka. Now, Sri Lanka was a brand new test nation. They'd just earned this prestigious status and were absolutely desperate to prove they belonged on the world stage. And on the other side, the Cavaliers, a team of New Zealand's top rugby players from a country that is an absolute powerhouse, a place where rugby is basically a religion. Both teams broke the boycott.
Okay, now we get to the real heart of the story. You'd think similar actions would lead to similar punishments, right? Well, what happened next was anything but similar. This is where you can really see how a nation's status can directly shape the fate of its athletes.
Just look at this. The difference is absolutely staggering. The Sri Lankan cricketers, banned from their sport for 25 years, a quarter of a century. The New Zealand rugby players, they got suspended for just 2 matches. Not 2 years, not 2 months, 2 games.
So, why the incredibly heavy hand in Sri Lanka? Well, it was a cold, calculated political move. See, the head of the cricket board was also a powerful government minister, and he needed to send a message to the world that Sri Lanka, the new kid on the block, took its international duties deadly seriously. The players' futures were completely secondary to the nation's reputation.
And the punishment was absolutely total. It wasn't just that they couldn't play, they couldn't coach, they couldn't be involved in administration, nothing. But it went even further. The state actually used its political influence to get them blacklisted from getting jobs in the private sector. It was a complete state-sanctioned professional and social erasure. Their livelihoods were systematically destroyed.
Now, let's flip over to New Zealand. While their government was officially against the tour, the rugby union there was dealing with a totally different kind of pressure. You see, their biggest fear wasn't about what the world thought of them. It was about losing their star players. They were terrified that if they handed down long bans, the players would just up and form a rival professional league based in South Africa, which would have absolutely gutted the sport back home.
So what did they do? Their response was purely pragmatic. It was a slap on the wrist, a nominal suspension that really just amounted to a minor interruption. The priority for them was crystal clear: protect the institution, preserve the talent, and keep their national sports stable.
A 25-year ban versus a 2-game suspension. I mean, these aren't just numbers on a chart. They represent two completely different life paths. Let's look at the real, human consequences of these decisions, which ended up defining the entire rest of these athletes' lives.
And here's the bottom line. The 25-year ban was devastatingly effective. For the Sri Lankan cricketers, their careers were just done, over. But the Cavaliers? After a very, very short break, they walked right back into the New Zealand national team, the legendary All Blacks.
Now this is what's truly wild. It shows you the scale of their comeback. Not only did they return, but 14 of these so-called rebels played in the very first Rugby World Cup the very next year. And they didn't just show up. They won the whole thing. They became world champions, celebrated as national heroes. For the Sri Lankan rebels, though, the story just spirals into tragedy. With their identities, their professions, their livelihoods all stripped away, the consequences weren't just professional, they were deeply personal. We're talking financial ruin and profound psychological fragility.
And these aren't just abstract ideas. These are broken lives. The team's star spinner, Ajit De Silva, had an emotional breakdown during the tour itself. Another player, Anura Ranasinghe, who is this brilliant young talent, fell into a deep depression and died at just 42. It was an entire generation of the country's best cricketers, a generation of wasted talent, completely and utterly wiped out.
So we've seen the what, and now it's time to really nail down the why. Why was there such a shocking disparity in justice?
Well, when you boil it all down, it came down to power and priorities. For Sri Lanka, the new fledgling nation, its athletes were seen as disposable, geopolitical pawns. Their entire futures were sacrificed on the altar of international acceptance. But for New Zealand, the established powerhouse, its athletes were seen as essential assets. Their incredible talent was protected to ensure the stability and the continued dominance of their national sport.
You know, there's an analogy that just illustrates this whole story perfectly. The Sri Lankan players were like sailors whose ship was scuttled by their own harbor master, leaving them marooned for life. The New Zealand Cavaliers? They were like captains who were just asked to drop anchor for a single tide before being handed back the keys to the entire fleet.
And all of this leaves us with a pretty tough question, doesn't it? This story seems to suggest that when the stakes get high enough, the scales of justice in sports aren't balanced by right and wrong, but by a nation's power and its place in the world. It's definitely something to think about the next time you see an athlete caught in a political crossfire.